So in this video, we'll cover the basics of what the design doc looked like for the VR experience. Let me see the length of the time. Maybe I'll do the AR one as well, or I'll do that in another video. But I'm really focused on the structure of the document. I'm going to be looking at the sections and why each of them are relevant to the main point of what this educational experience is, because these are some of the sections that you'll be thinking about and writing about for your design doc. And then some material and some sections will be sound similar or will be something you're familiar with from the research round, because remember, the research turns and elements of it continue on into the design. So anyway, the title of the design document, the title of the experience or the application, the platform you're building for, the genre of the app, your target, your user target, who's publishing it. It's kind of just general information. And then there's just kind of like the splash information, the summary of the project as it is. What's the point of it? The name of it? Just some background info to get you up and going. Almost like the marketing material. Just something to read to pull you in for more reading, basically get you primed. So the executive summary is actually the name of it comes in use for a long time, and it comes a lot from the business world. And it's when you have a huge document. Low-level people, middle-level people, they're going to dive in. A lot of it's to them, to the artist, to the programmer, to the project manager. But executives are usually managing multiple projects, or they just need that high level, like, give me in a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, what is going on and why should I care? What's the point of this project? What's its impact? What's the core of it? So you really can't distill out that executive summary or the abstract until you kind of write it, the whole document, and get it yourself oriented on what all this material, what's the point of this project. But just know that there's like the 15-second elevator pitch. It's like if you were to go in front of some investors, or if you're out networking, or if you're trying to sell people in your team, or if you're generating material on the internet and people are like on social media and you have 10 seconds to sell them if they want to put more attention on to clicking a link and learning more. So that's what an executive summary is. A few sentences, a paragraph, get to the point, make it really impactful. It distills down your document to what it is you're trying to do. Unique selling points. So why should I even care about this? What's better than a lecture or a textbook or a video or a website or something that's more traditional? How is your educational technology standing apart from just the traditional methods of teaching, of education? Why are you distinct? So this will definitely, you'll end up doing a very brief executive summary, but a unique selling point is you spent all this effort researching this problem and you found the solution. You should be able to have some unique selling points at this point, because you really tried to solve something that was the current stuff on the market's failing. So your design objectives, these are your core features, your core ideas that you're designing your experience around. So there's a few points of your target audience, of your target learning objective. That what's the point of this web-based 2D or 3D learning experience? There's some core things that you think you can improve upon what's currently out there, and that's what you're gonna focus your design efforts on. So a lot of this comes from your research, defining the problem space. You found that there are some situations that are suboptimal, and this is what you're going to design for. So you're going to focus your efforts on a few core things that you think can really increase the educational benefit of this content. and which then goes down to, well, what are you trying to teach? What of your what content for your users are they trying to learn? So what are the learning objectives? So later on, I don't think I'm going to get to it in this video, but I'll break apart, say, binary math, or probably bubble sort, or how to go and research, just like one lesson. How is it currently being taught, like on a video or a web page, text format, and what are the learning objectives coming from a lesson? So a lesson might take 10, 20, 30 minutes or an hour to like absorb. And the learning objectives will be the cluster points, the many parts that build up into that hour-long learning experience. So the stuff I was making was really more like 15, 20-minute learning experiences. So learning objectives, maybe each objective takes like a minute, a few minutes for a person to kind of absorb. So think of them as the steps, the recipe to learn the whole lesson. So if you were to learn about astronomy, you have to understand some elements of gravity, some elements of physics, some elements of matter, how it clumps together to form asteroids or comets or planetary bodies, astral bodies that eventually become planets or stars or what have you. So there's like a building blocks. Yeah, that's probably the best way to think of it. So these learning objectives are building blocks of ideas that come together into more complex ideas. So how do you break apart a complex idea into a set of smaller ideas? And the point of that is that then it's so much easier to approach one smaller idea instead of one complex idea. And so then, say a complex idea breaks up into a collection of 10 small ideas. Well, then you just have a much simpler, you just have many, but they're simpler design approaches to how do I build this interactive experience. So you don't have to look at the whole nest of a big complex problem. You break it down into a modular way, and you focus on the smaller problems one at a time. And you teach this and that and next in a sequential way, which they call scaffolding. You build up from simpler ideas to larger ideas with to practice along the way, the scaffolds of a building, the way for a learner to hold on to grasp larger ideas. So anyway, the learning objectives are like these small building blocks that when you piece them together in an interactive experience, the user learns something larger, a bigger learning point. And then for us and for most interactive technologies, you're going to be using the practice, learn, demonstrate, or what's called experiential learning. And the form of this comes in constructivism and just basically theories of learning. And in this case, you must get your hands dirty. You must practice and you must demonstrate that you understand the topic at hand. That's why it's interactive. It's sandbox. It's free form. That you are allowed to fail and there's no penalty for failing, or it's very light, and you keep trying until you succeed. And so anyway, that was the learning objectives coming from the design objectives. And then the game objectives, you could think of them as, how do we group up all of these interesting design ideas and learning ideas, or design objectives and learning objectives, and how do we group them up into larger playable experiences, larger loops? So games you can think of as a whole gaming experience comes in like levels or maps or stages. They're broken down. Play a level, beat the boss. Play a level, beat the boss, and then beat the end boss, and you win the game. But anyway, these are larger clumps of the experience. So, and ideas of you might hit the same learning objectives over and over again in a playable or gamified way, So how do you turn these learning objectives into a fun, interactive experience that could be played over and over again until you understand the concept, which means you've practiced until you've demonstrated the material. So in this case, a game objective. Notice how the objectives are kind of building up too into more complex steps or stages. Just like I broke down the learning objectives into this idea of modular or smaller pieces, we're working our way up from design objectives, learning objectives, into game objectives. In this, the game objective is like the entirety, all the pieces of the learning objective and design objectives come together into these levels, into these tasks that give a 10-minute, 15-minute, 20-minute experience to the user, to have a fun, iterative, practiceful way to learn the material. And once we've defined the game objectives for our experience, we started to get into some more details about it. Okay, so how do we gamify the binary system or the base 2 numeral system? Well, we're going to move into levers. These levers are going to be structured into stations. These stations are going to be structured into, or not stations, or yeah, you could call them stations or kiosks, or location points where there's multiple levers that have an interface. And then all these stations come together into a level. And the reason I defined what a station was is that in this game, we dealt with space stations, which have multiple localized stations within them. I just wanted to be very clear that, yes, in the game, we're moving around a space station that had multiple stations or kiosks or localized areas to have interactions within them. So the binary system was focused on stations or kiosks or local areas where a person can interact. In those stations, we decided the interaction areas to have a lever, a dial, a display screen, ways to interact with a hand, like a lever and a dial, and ways to receive information back, like through the display screen. So these are the elements, the input and output elements of a local interaction station. And then here we're defining the core mechanics of each station. And some of the core mechanics are generalized across all stations, and some of them are very specific per station. In the tutorial station, the task station, and number station. And here we have the order of the stations, the name, the components are the parts of each station. And this was kind of an earlier iteration. Some of this did change, and these are all living documents. It's okay. Once you get your ideas out of your head and you start to implement them, either in a paper prototype or a digital prototype, and things just change. No, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. This is too difficult. We're going to, things just end up changing. And then the functions of each station. All right. So these sections up above make a lot of sense to give to the assignment to you all. But these get particular into our implementation, which was the binary math or the bubble sort. So this area I might relabel like just the core mechanics. What are your core mechanics, your core interactions? They don't happen to be about stations or kiosks, because that was our implementation method in our experience. And so that you'll be focusing on what are your mechanics, but you don't have to do stations. More than likely, you won't be. This is important. So the UX interaction design. All right. So we kind of talked earlier about learnability, memorability, accessibility. Is it easy to learn, easy to remember, easy to access, interact with? And so these are some of the core tenets of when you choose to create an interaction. For you, you'll be using mostly standard 2D user interfaces that might be interlaced with 3D graphics, but like you might be using buttons and sliders and toggles and drop downs and text fields, which are very, very standardized 2D interactions. And even 3D stuff has become very standard. It's very much of a physics ray casting of did this 3D object touch this one, and we'll get into that stuff. But even in the 3D area with the 3D buttons, it's still a button. It's still a click, just the same as a 2D button. It's still a click. Types of interactions. So macro, middle, and micro. So this is covered in the textbooks, and I'm not going to get too heavy in the interaction design readings just yet. I'm actually going to have the first few weeks be more about how to break down a learning objective, and then the next few weeks are learning about interaction design and how you might implement these learning objectives with certain like you choose the interaction designs for your mechanics. But just be aware of these next 4 or 5 weeks, you're going to have to think about your interactions in the perspective of the macro-esque, the entirety of your experience down to the micro interactions or the small parts of your experience. So you can say the macro interactions from the perspective of the system, the entire system, the input, the output, all the stations together, how to guide the user through the navigation of the systems, providing help, how to instruct them on the task, what have you. The middle interactions from the binary counting, was in the stations, the number station, color station, what have you. So processing user input, providing visual stimulus back to the user, so that input and output directly at a station while they're interacting with the levers, learning about binary counting. And the micro interactions. So to actually how do we design a lever? What does it feel like to grab it? What does it feel like what is the min and max rotation on it? When you pull a lever, how do you show the user the current state of it? There's an on and off, but there's a continuous movement between it, stuff like this. This is the micro scale considerations, the smallest level. All right, and so you'll learn about triggers with interaction design, like cues and actions. So like, how do you tell the user what's available for them to use? How do you know when the user is their intent, their interest in using this interaction? How does their interaction impact the larger system that you're developing? And then we have troubleshooting, risk assessment. So what are like the edge cases? Where do things go wrong? How do we plan for the user to do all the wrong things that we don't want them to do? And how do we safeguard against that? In this case, what if they're getting lost? What if they're walking through the virtual walls? What if they just don't pay attention to the navigator, the narrator? What is, like, if everything fails, what's the failing and how do we prevent against it? And we use scenarios much like we use in research. A lot of this stuff that you're going to learn gets reused over and over in different ways. All right, and then prototyping. So what's the point? How do we know that we're doing something good? How do we know that we're learning something? In this case, we had some set directives. So we know that we're building in virtual reality, there's going to be a 20-foot by 20-foot space where the user can interact. We know that we have to place all the stations within that space. We know that we want the user to start in the center, but move clockwise. Why clockwise? Because that just seems to be the natural order of the way a Western person would think anyway, is that to move in a clockwise orientation, because that's the way our clocks work. And again, we start with paper prototyping and how do we get across the experience to the user so that it's intuitive and natural, and we minimize the failure points. This is pretty much probably your document's probably going to end around here. So for Sprint 2, you'll probably end around troubleshooting. Yeah, because we're thinking about space and ergonomics, which is very particular to VR. You wouldn't do that. But here we're actually talking about some bubble sorting and the level play. But since I'm kind of talking about binary, the first level, which is binary math, the second level is bubble sort. I'm just gonna skip bubble sort story. We don't need to worry about. If you're interested in it, you can definitely put your effort into it. Concept art, don't have to worry about. All right. So actually, that was a good overview of the document. So you can anticipate that you're going to need some type of generic overhead overview material just to get the user situated. The user of your document, the user of reading your document to understand your app. That might be more likely a teammate of yours. The executive summary is definitely going to be important. Unique selling points, design objectives. Notice how they're very to the point. They're bullet points. And normally we're going to do all the rest of the parts. We'll come back to the executive summary. So design objectives, definitely. Learning objectives, absolutely. It's educational technology. And then game objectives, sure. Like how to do this. Because the reason that it's in a gaming method is that in a repeatable, structured environment, much like a game level. You need to keep repeating the actions that we're trying to reinforce with you until you understand the point of them, in that which case you should have beaten a level and moved on to the next level. This particular is to the binaries. This is the game objectives. So for you, it'd be whatever you're trying to teach. We're trying to teach a binary math system, but you teach whatever insert here and talk about gamifying your system. Now we have the core mechanics of the stations. For you, it's just the core mechanics of your game, of the elements that you're focusing on. We focused on stations, kiosks that you can move to. You would have either core mechanics, or if you have something to focus on your mechanics on, you could focus on it here. The interaction design of the user experience, your types of interactions at the most macro level and at the most micro level. You'll have to define them at least to a basic extent. And it might just be 2D user interfaces. And then just some basic, just list out like one troubleshooting element. How we do. What's like some of the, if the user goes way off the rails, what do you think that might be and how do you prevent it? All right, so at least you know what's to come in the next 4 or 5 weeks.